Hello, welcome to the fifth in our instalment on screenwriting with Karel Seegers. Hello, Karel.
Hello, Phil.
Now, we've talked about characters having goals and the importance of action for a character. Let's talk a bit more specifically about what our character is, the main character, our protagonist in a story. What is a protagonist, really?
Yeah, that sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? And it isn't, you know? And there's so many names for it. So Sid Field doesn't like the word protagonist. He said, why do you use protagonist? You've got main character, that's good enough. Well, you know, you've got main character, you've got protagonist, you've got hero, you've got point of view character, and most of the time they're all the same. Sometimes they're not, and that's where it gets really difficult.
So what is the main character?
Well, I always say, you know, ultimately, what does the audience say? You know, how does the audience answer the question, who is it about? And if there's disagreement in the audience about who it's about, that's interesting. So maybe there the screenwriter hasn't done the job properly.
Because there are films that have a very clear main protagonist. I mean, one of the common examples is like Die Hard, for example. It's obviously about the Bruce Willis character. But there's ensemble pieces, and it's hard to know who is your main character. Is there a main character?
I wouldn't even talk about ensemble because it's such a small percentage of films that are successful. I'm serious, it's only like 1 or 2%. And still, screenwriters still want to write multi-protagonist stories. But really look at it, 2% of the successful films only have ensemble. And that's, you know, out of those that get made, there's still, you know, every year is 50,000 that don't get made.
Let me bring up, to play devil's advocate, last episode we talked about The Avengers, very successful film. It's an ensemble piece. There's multiple principal characters, each with their own film franchise. Who's the central character of that?
Yeah, ultimately I'd say it's Iron Man. I think Iron Man plays the main role in terms of he makes the most important decision. I need to analyze it. I haven't analyzed the film, but just off the top of my head, I'd say it's Robert Downey Jr.
I'd have to agree with you, mainly not because of who the star is, but because of how the film ends and the role he plays in that climax.
And that's really a very good test. And I had the discussion with students only last week. If you're not sure who's the main character, look at the ending of your film. Look at who makes the final decision, who takes the climactic action. And that's usually the character that should then be the main character from the beginning. If it isn't, maybe you need to do some,
One good example of this I remember was the original Blob with Steve McQueen, who is technically meant to be the main character, but he's not making most of the key decisions throughout the film. He's letting other people do it, so he's a very weak main character as a result. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, often you have two characters, like, you know, Finding Nemo or Thelma and Louise or The Shawshank Redemption. And then we look at which is the character who changes, and does the character change because of their own actions or because of another character's actions. And in The Shawshank Redemption, it's clear that Red, played by Morgan Freeman, changes because of the actions of Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins. So, but you know, really look at those issues, because once you start pulling them apart, and there's several characters who are both vying for that main character role, it becomes very problematic.
So even in a buddy flick where you've got two very strong protagonists working together, one tends to be the main one, even so.
And as you say, the key criteria are the ending, the final action, the climactic choice, and the goals. Whose main goal pushes the story forward. And that's another indicator. Sometimes you have a main character who's very passive, and he's observing in the background. Animal Kingdom. In Animal Kingdom, Jay, he's just looking at this family, you know, falling apart or, you know, imploding. And then he does an action in the third act, which proves him to be the main character. Before that, he's just a point of view character.
Right.
You can argue that Ben Mendelsohn is really the main character, but then he's the antagonist. So we don't believe that an antagonist can be a main character.
Is it possible to switch your main character halfway through a story?
Well, Alfred Hitchcock did that once.
Well, famously in Psycho, yes.
But there, I think it was a gimmick that had this shock value. I'd say don't. You know, don't try this at home. No.
And what about something like, I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, where Sam he's not really the main character, Frodo's the main character, certainly in the films rather than the books. But he takes a very proactive role later in the story.
Yeah.
And he's almost becoming the main character for that part of the story.
Yeah, I agree. And with properties like Lord of the Rings, you get away with it. We see something like Inception, where also the Ariadne character, Emma Page, at some stage kind of takes over. We see the whole story through her eyes. We learn about the world through her eyes. And we kind of look from a distance at the Don Cobb, the Leonardo DiCaprio character. And then later we go back to him.
So it is possible to switch main characters, but it's not advisable.
I know, and I think even in a movie that was successful like Inception, I think it still leaves us cold in terms of that main character. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why Inception may have been a very successful film at the time. I don't think it's going to survive as a classic. I don't think it will.
No,
I don't think so.
What about supporting characters then? Because very often, if you have a very clearly defined main character, very often they're defined by the people around them, by the supporting cast, by the girlfriend, the boyfriend, the boss, whoever it might be.
Yeah.
And they help you decide whose journey you're actually going to follow.
Now we're entering really interesting territory, Phil, because you know why this is? It's because every story is about you, Phil Moore. Every story is about the viewer. Every story is about our own psychology, and we project who we are on all the characters around us. And that's obviously, the story is the metaphor. The story tells our story on the screen, our own story, our own conflicts. And in order to make it, interesting, and to express and to explain to a degree what's going on in our minds, all these different characters that we have in our heads are projected onto different supporting characters. And that's why the stories of these supporting characters all need to intersect with the main character. They've got to have to do something with the main character. And that's where archetypes come in. Carl Jung did a lot of work in that, Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey.
Yeah.
So all these supporting characters play a certain role. The mentor, the herald, the messenger, the lover.
Which is all part of the hero's journey, those archetypes.
And they're all part of the hero himself or herself.
And it gives us someone to relate to.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Carol Seegers, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
See you next time in our continuing series on screenwriting with Carol Seegers.